Hello. Tonight's story takes us into the forest, into a youth scouting camp where the cabins are small, the paths are muddy, and the trees stand like dark, patient witnesses. It is late. The camp is quiet, and outside it's raining. You may hear that rain behind my voice as the story unfolds. This is not a loud horror story. There are no jump scares. Nothing bursts out from the dark. Instead, this is a long, slow mystery. A quiet investigation into something that happened once on a rainy night at a place called Hollow Pines Scout Camp. Settle in. Let the sound of the rain become part of the story. And if you fall asleep along the way, that's perfectly fine. The rain started the moment we turned off the highway. I remember that clearly. How the sky seemed to decorate as soon as the camp road appeared between the trees. How the first drops hit the windshield like a warning. Not a downpour, just a steady, quiet rain that made the forest look softer somehow, like an old photograph left too long in the sun. My name is Morgan Hayes, and I've been leading youth groups for nearly 15 years. This was supposed to be a simple weekend retreat. 23 kids from the county program, 3 other counselors, and me. Hollow Pines had been closed for renovations for almost 2 decades, and this was its first season back in operation. The camp director, a woman named Eleanor Voss, had called me personally. Her voice on the phone had been warm but careful, the way people sound when they're asking for a favor they're not sure you'll grant. "The place needs life again," she'd said. "It's been empty too long." Now, as our van rolled down that narrow dirt road, I understood what she meant. The trees here grew differently than other places. Taller, darker. Their branches woven together overhead like fingers clasped in prayer. The rain filtered down through them in shifting curtains, sometimes light as mist, sometimes heavier, drumming against the metal roof of the van. The kids were quiet in their seats. Even the usual troublemakers, Marcus and Jade, who never stopped talking, had gone still, watching the forest slide past the windows. "Looks like a horror movie," someone whispered from the back. "It's just rain," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You'll get used to it." But I wasn't sure I believed that myself. When we finally reached the main lodge, Eleanor was waiting under the covered porch, holding 2 umbrellas she didn't really need. She was older than I expected, late 60s maybe, with silver hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Welcome to Hollow Pines," she said, and her smile didn't quite reach those watchful eyes. "I hope the rain doesn't bother you. It's a bit of a permanent feature around here." The other counselors, David, Sarah, and Tom, started herding the kids toward the cabins while I lingered with Eleanor on the porch. Up close, I could see how carefully the camp had been maintained. Fresh paint on the lodge, new steps, clean windows. But underneath, the bones of the place were old, very old. "How long has it been closed?" I asked. 22 years, Eleanor said. She was looking out at the rain, not at me. "Since the summer of 2003. "That's a long time." "Yes," she agreed. "It is." She handed me a set of keys and a weathered map of the campgrounds. 6 cabins arranged in a semicircle around a central fire pit, the lake just beyond, barely visible through the rain and trees. The dining hall, the boathouse, the old ranger station at the far end of the property. And there, on the eastern edge of the map, slightly separated from the others, Cabin 7. I don't know why I noticed it particularly. Perhaps it was the way it sat alone on the page, or the faint water stain that made the ink there slightly smudged. But something about it caught my attention. "All the cabins are open?" I asked. Eleanor hesitated, just for a moment, just long enough for me to notice. "All except 7, she said quietly. "That one's still being renovated. Best keep the kids away from it." The rain grew heavier then, shifting from a gentle patter to something more insistent. It ran off the porch roof in silver sheets, turning the campgrounds into a blur of green and gray. "I'll make sure they know," I told her. Eleanor nodded, but she was still staring out at that curtain of rain, at something I couldn't see. When she finally turned back to me, her expression had changed, become more guarded, more careful. "This place has good bones," she said. "It just needs to remember how to be a camp again, how to be normal." Normal. The word hung between us like the rain hung in the air, present, persistent, impossible to ignore. I took the keys and the map and headed back to help with the unpacking. Behind me, I heard Eleanor go back inside the lodge, the screen door closing with the soft creak that somehow carried through all that rain. By evening, we had everyone settled. The kids were in cabins 1 through 4, counselors in 5 and 6. The lodge had a working kitchen and a common room with a massive stone fireplace that we got going despite the dampness. The rain continued, steady and unchanging, a rhythm that seemed to seep into everything, our conversations, our movements, even our thoughts. At dinner, the kids wanted to tell ghost stories. I let them. It seemed harmless enough, just the usual camp fare, tales of hitchhikers and haunted mirrors and things that lived in the woods. But I noticed how often their stories came back to the same themes: disappearances, empty places, things left behind and forgotten. And I noticed how carefully Eleanor listened from her seat by the fire, her face unreadable in the shifting light. After the kids were in bed and the other counselors had retired, I stood on the lodge porch with a cup of coffee, watching the rain fall through the darkness. The camp was peaceful now, just the sound of water on wood, water on leaves, water on the surface of the unseen lake. That's when I saw the light. Just for a moment, a soft yellow glow in the window of cabin 7. There and gone so quickly I might have imagined it. I set down my coffee and stepped out into the rain. The rain was lighter than I expected. It touched my face like cold silk, soaking through my jacket in moments, but somehow not unpleasant. Just present. Always present. I followed the path toward cabin 7, my flashlight cutting through the darkness in a narrow beam. The cabin sat about 50 yards from the others, tucked into a small clearing where the trees grew thick on 3 sides. Someone had put yellow caution tape across the door, but it hung loose now, one end torn free and swaying in the rain. The windows were dark, No light now, if there ever had been. I stood there for a long moment, listening. Just the rain. Just the endless, patient sound of water finding its way down through leaves, dripping from branches, soaking into earth that never seemed to dry. You shouldn't be out here. I turned quickly. Eleanor stood at the edge of the clearing, a long raincoat making her nearly invisible against the dark trees. She moved toward me slowly, deliberately, as if approaching something fragile. "I thought I saw a light," I said. "Sometimes the rain plays tricks," Eleanor replied. "Reflections, shadows. This forest is full of them." She moved past me to check the door. Still locked, still secure. Then she turned, and in the beam of my flashlight, I saw her face clearly. Tired, sad, much older than it had seemed this afternoon. "I think you should know about Cabin 7, she said quietly, "before you hear it from someone else." We walked back to the lodge together, the rain following us like a third presence. Inside, Eleanor made tea with hands that shook just slightly, then settled into one of the chairs by the dying fire. I took the seat across from her and waited. "In August of 2003, she began, "we had a full camp. 90 kids, 12 counselors. It was the last week of the season, Saturday night." She paused, watching the fire. A boy named Daniel Carver was sleeping in Cabin 7. He was 14. Quiet kid. Artistic. He liked to draw the lake at sunrise. The rain intensified outside, drumming harder against the roof. On Sunday morning, his cabin counselor went to wake everyone up for breakfast. Daniel's bunk was empty. His sleeping bag was still zipped up, but he was gone. Shoes still under the bed. Jacket still hanging on its hook. "He ran away?" I asked, though I already knew that wasn't the answer. Eleanor shook her head. "The police searched for 6 days. Dogs, divers, volunteer search parties from 3 counties. They found nothing. No tracks, no torn clothing, no signs of struggle. It was as if he'd simply dissolved into the rain." "The rain was falling then too?" "It had been raining for 3 days straight," Eleanor said. "Just like this. Steady, constant. The lake was high. The trails were mud. They thought maybe he'd gone down to the water, gotten disoriented, drowned. But the divers found nothing. Not then. Not ever." She wrapped her hands around her teacup, seeking its warmth. The camp closed 2 weeks later. Daniel's parents wanted it shut down permanently, but the property was tied up in trusts and county ordinances. So it just sat for 22 years, waiting. "Why reopen it now?" I asked. Eleanor looked at me then, and her eyes were full of something I couldn't quite name. Guilt, maybe, or hope, or the desperate need to make something right that had gone wrong so long ago. "Because empty places grow stories," she said, "and stories grow teeth. This camp needs to be a camp again, or it will never be anything but the place where Daniel Carver disappeared." Outside, the rain shifted. a breath of wind sending it sideways against the windows, then back to its steady vertical fall. "What do you believe happened to him?" I asked. Eleanor was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I was the camp director then, too," she said. "I was the one who called his parents. I was the one who told them we didn't know where their son was. 22 years, Morgan, and I still don't have an answer for them." She stood, moving to the window. Beyond the glass, the camp was invisible in the darkness and rain. "Cabin 7 was his cabin," she continued. "The renovation story is true. We have been working on it. But it's also, I couldn't bring myself to use it. Not yet. Maybe not ever." "But you kept it," I said. "You didn't tear it down." "No," she turned back to me. "Because sometimes I think he might still be there. Not his body, just something. An answer. A reason. Something I missed 22 years ago." The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. The rain continued its patient rhythm. "Get some sleep," Eleanor said finally. "Tomorrow the kids will need you fresh. And Morgan?" She paused at the door to the back rooms. "Don't go to cabin 7 again. Whatever you think you see there, whatever you think you hear, it's not worth finding." She left me alone with the dying fire and the sound of rain on the roof, steady as a heartbeat, old as memory, patient as guilt. I sat there until the fire went out completely, watching shadows dance on the walls, and thinking about a 14-year-old boy who'd walked out of his cabin into a rainy night and never came back. Somewhere out in the darkness, water dripped from the eaves of cabin 7, marking time, keeping watch, waiting for something I didn't yet understand. Morning came gray and wet. The rain had softened to a fine mist that hung between the trees like breath, but it never quite stopped. It was the kind of rain you could almost forget about, until you stepped outside and felt it gathering on your skin, soaking through your clothes in slow, patient increments. The kids were restless at breakfast. Too much energy, too much curiosity, too much time spent listening to the rain and inventing stories about it. Marcus and Jade were already planning to sneak down to the lake despite the weather. Two of the younger girls, Emma and Zoe, wanted to explore the old boathouse. "Stay together," I told them. "Stay on the marked trails, and nobody goes near cabin 7. "Why not?" Marcus asked. "What's in cabin 7? "Renovations," I said firmly. "Sharp tools, open floorboards, all the things that make for interesting insurance claims. Stay away." But I could see it in their eyes. The prohibition had done exactly what prohibitions always do. It had made cabin 7 the most interesting place in camp. David took the older kids for a nature walk despite the rain. Sarah organized crafts in the lodge. Tom was supposed to repair some of the dock boards by the lake. That left me to do what I'd been avoiding since last night: go through the camp's old records. Eleanor kept them in a filing cabinet in the small office behind the kitchen. Personnel files, maintenance logs, incident reports, old registration forms going back decades. She'd given me the key this morning without comment, just placed it in my hand and said, "If you're looking for answers, start at the beginning." I pulled the files from 2003 and spread them across the desk. Daniel Carver's registration form was near the bottom of the stack. The handwriting was neat, careful, probably filled out by his mother. Emergency contact: Margaret and Henry Carver. Medical conditions: none. Dietary restrictions: none. Previous camp experience: 2 summers at Pine Ridge. There was a small photo stapled to the corner. School picture quality, slightly overexposed. Daniel had dark hair, serious eyes, and a small smile that looked like it didn't come easily, but meant something when it did. 14 years old, just a kid. I read through the incident reports from that week. Nothing unusual at first. The standard complaints about weather, a few homesick kids, 1 case of poison ivy. Then, 3 days before Daniel disappeared, there was a note from his cabin counselor, a college student named Marcus Chen. Daniel staying up late drawing again. Says he keeps seeing something in the trees by the lake. Told him it's just shadows from the rain. He seems okay otherwise. The next day, another note. Daniel asked if anyone else ever stays in cabin 7 when camp is closed. He says he heard someone walking around outside last night. I checked. No tracks, no signs of intrusion. Told him it was probably deer. Rain makes everything sound different. Then nothing until the morning report, written in Eleanor's hand. Daniel Carver missing from cabin 7. Last seen at lights out, 10 p.m. Sleeping bag zipped but empty. Door still locked from inside. All windows secured. Searching now. I sat back, listening to the rain tap against the office window. The pattern felt familiar now, almost comforting in its constancy. But underneath that steady rhythm, I could imagine how it might have sounded to a 14-year-old boy lying awake in the dark, how the rain might have disguised other sounds, hidden other movements, made the familiar strange and the strange invisible. I searched through the other files and found what I was looking for near the back. A manila envelope marked Daniel Carver, Personal Effects. Inside were his belongings from that week. A paperback book, something about dragons. A digital watch that had stopped working years ago. A Camp Hollow Pines t-shirt, washed and folded. And a small spiral notebook with a blue cover, its pages warped from old moisture. I opened it carefully. The first pages were normal enough. Sketches of trees, the lake, other campers. Daniel had been talented. His lines were confident, his sense of perspective mature for his age. He'd captured the way the rain looked falling through branches, the particular stillness of water under a gray sky. But as I turned through the notebook, the drawings changed. They became darker, more focused. All of them were of cabin 7, drawn from different angles, at different times of day. In each one, there was something in the windows, just a suggestion of shadow, a darkness that shouldn't have been there. And in the margins, written in Daniel's neat, careful handwriting, someone is watching. They walk when it rains. The cabin remembers. The final page was different from the others. It showed the interior of cabin 7, the bunks, the wood stove, the footlockers. But in the far corner, barely sketched in, was a figure. Tall, impossibly thin, more suggestion than substance. And underneath, in handwriting that had become shaky, uncertain, It knows my name. I closed the notebook slowly, my hands unsteady. Outside, the rain had picked up again, harder now, drumming against the window like it wanted to come inside. There was a knock at the office door. Tom stood there, rain dripping from his jacket, his face pale. "Morgan," he said quietly, "you need to come to the lake. We found something." The path to the lake was slick with rain and fallen leaves. Tom led the way, not speaking, his flashlight beam bouncing with each step. Behind us, I could hear Eleanor following, her breathing quick and sharp in the damp air. The lake at Hollow Pines was smaller than I'd imagined, maybe 200 yards across, surrounded by dense trees that leaned in close over the water. The surface was pocked with rain, each drop creating expanding circles that overlapped and dissolved into one another, a constant shifting pattern that hypnotized if you watched it too long. Tom had been repairing the dock when he'd seen it. A portion of the old boathouse foundation had finally given way under years of water damage, and something had worked its way free from the mud beneath. David was already there, keeping the kids away from the edge. They stood in a cluster under the trees, trying to stay dry, their faces bright with the morbid curiosity that comes so easily at that age. "Everyone back to the lodge," Eleanor said. "David, Sarah, take them inside. Hot chocolate, board games, whatever keeps them occupied." Sarah started herding them back up the path, but I caught Marcus watching over his shoulder, his eyes fixed on whatever lay half buried in the mud at the water's edge. When they were gone, the three of us, Tom, Eleanor, and I, approached the boathouse ruins. It was a backpack, old, water-damaged, but somehow still intact. The fabric was faded gray, the straps encrusted with dried mud and something that might have been algae. Tom had already pulled it most of the way onto solid ground, but he'd stopped there, waiting for Eleanor before opening it. She knelt beside it slowly, her hands hovering over the zippers without touching them. "I know this backpack," she said. "Green, originally, with reflective strips." The rain fell harder, streaming off our hoods, drumming against the dock. Eleanor opened the main compartment carefully. Inside, wrapped in what had once been a plastic bag, were more notebooks. Not spiral-bound like the one in the office, but harder-bound journals, the kind you might use for serious work. The water had gotten to them despite the plastic, warping the pages, but the ink was still visible. All of them were filled with drawings, the same scene over and over again, rendered with obsessive detail. Cabin 7 from every conceivable angle. Cabin 7 in daylight, in darkness, in rain, in fog. Cabin 7 with every window carefully documented, every board measured, every shadow mapped. And in every single drawing, that figure in the corner. Never quite clear, never quite absent. "He was trying to understand it," Eleanor said. "Whatever he saw, he was trying to make sense of it." I flipped through the pages, watching Daniel Carver's increasingly desperate attempts to document something that refused to be documented. The drawings became more frantic toward the end, lines darker, shadows heavier, the figure in the corner growing more present with each page. The final journal was different. Instead of drawings, it was filled with writing. Daniel's careful handwriting at first, then growing more hurried, more erratic. Day 3 at camp. It's raining again. I can see it from my bunk, standing in the trees between here and the lake. It doesn't move like a person. It moves like rain, like shadow, like something that's been here so long it's part of the place. Marcus says I'm imagining things, but it knows where I sleep. It knows which bunk is mine. I try to draw it clearly, but every time I do, the lines go wrong. Like the paper won't let me get it right. Like it doesn't want to be seen clearly. Tonight I heard it walking around the cabin. Not on the porch, underneath. In the crawl space under the floorboards. It was looking for something. The next several pages were torn out, ripped away roughly, leaving ragged edges. Then, on the final remaining page, just 3 words, in handwriting so shaky it barely looked like his. It found me. Eleanor closed the journal carefully. Her hands... The rain fell around us, into the lake, onto the notebooks, onto 3 people standing at the edge of questions that had waited 22 years for anyone to ask them. He went into the lake, Tom said. That's what happened. He ran from something, real or imagined, and he went into the water. Then where's his body? Eleanor asked. The divers searched for days. The lake isn't that deep. They would have found him. Maybe they missed him, Tom insisted. Maybe the current. There is no current, Eleanor said. It's a closed lake, fed by rain and groundwater. Nothing flows in or out. I was looking at cabin 7, visible through the trees about 100 yards away. From here, I could see what Daniel must have seen from his bunk. The way it sat slightly apart from the others, the way the trees crowded close around it, the way the shadows fell differently there, even in the rain. What if he never left? I asked. They both turned to look at me. What if he's still in cabin 7? I continued. Not his body, not the way we're thinking, but what if whatever he saw, whatever he was trying to document, what if it's still there? Eleanor shook her head. We've been through that cabin 100 times. The police searched it. Volunteers searched it. I've searched it. There's nothing there. Nothing visible, I said. The rain grew heavier, driving us back from the lake. We gathered up the notebooks, wrapped them carefully in plastic from Tom's repair kit, and made our way back toward the lodge. Behind us, the lake continued its patient reception of the rain, each drop disappearing into water that held 22 years of secrets beneath its gray surface. That evening, after dinner, after the kids were settled with movies in the common room, I went back to the office and read through every word Daniel Carver had written. Not just the journals from the lake, but every scrap of paper I could find that bore his handwriting. Notes, sketches, even a letter he'd started to his parents but never finished. A picture emerged, not of a frightened boy imagining monsters, but of someone trying very hard to be rational about something irrational. Someone documenting what he saw with the careful precision of a scientist, even as what he saw made less and less sense. In one of the earlier journals, before the fear crept in, he'd written, "I think it's been here as long as the camp has, maybe longer. The way it moves, it's like it knows every tree, every path, every board in every cabin. Like it's walked these patterns so many times, they've worn grooves in the air itself. If rain can wear down stone, what can time and repetition wear down?" I sat back, listening to the rain continue its endless percussion on the roof. What can time and repetition wear down? Anything, I thought. Everything. Even the barrier between what is and what shouldn't be. I made my decision around midnight. The lodge was quiet, the fire reduced to embers, the rain a constant whisper against the windows. Everyone else was asleep, the kids in their cabins, the counselors in theirs, Eleanor in her small room behind the office. I put on my jacket, took a flashlight, and went out into the rain. It was heavier now than it had been, but still not quite a storm. Just persistent, just eternal. The beam of my flashlight cut through it in a pale yellow cone, illuminating nothing but water and darkness. Cabin 7 waited. I'd told myself I was going to watch it, to see if the light appeared again, to be a rational adult in the face of old tragedies and atmospheric stories. But as I approached, I knew that wasn't the whole truth. I was going because Daniel Carver had been 14 years old and alone and afraid, and no one had believed him. I was going because 22 years was too long for a question to go unanswered. I was going because sometimes the only way through fear is to walk directly into it. The caution tape had been replaced since last night. Eleanor's work, probably. I ducked under it and tried the door. Still locked. The windows were covered from inside with paper or boards, impossible to see through. I walked around the cabin slowly, playing my light over every board, every gap, every shadow. It looked like all the other cabins, a bit more weathered maybe, but structurally sound. Nothing special, nothing strange, just a building where a boy had slept and from which he'd disappeared. I found what I was looking for around the back, a small access panel to the crawl space beneath the cabin, secured with a simple latch. The kind of thing you'd use to check foundations or repair plumbing. "It walks underneath," Daniel had written, in the crawl space under the floorboards. The latch opened easily, too easily, as if someone had used it recently. I got down on my hands and knees in the mud and rain and shone my flashlight into the space beneath the cabin. It wasn't tall enough to stand in, maybe 3 feet of clearance between the ground and the floor joists above. The beam of my light swept across bare earth, stone foundation supports, old cobwebs thick with dust and moisture, and drawings. Someone had drawn on the underside of the floorboards, the same images from Daniel's notebooks, but larger, darker, more elaborate. Cabin 7 from every angle. The figure in the corner. Trees, rain, water. They covered every visible surface, drawn in what looked like charcoal or pencil, preserved by the dryness of the space, protected from the rain that fell everywhere else. And there, in the farthest corner, barely visible in the flashlight beam, was a sleeping bag, green, rolled up, waiting. I pulled myself back out of the crawl space and stood in the rain, my heart pounding. Someone had been under there. Someone had been drawing. Someone had left their sleeping bag behind. Or they never left at all. A voice whispered in my mind. They just found a different way to stay. I was reaching for my phone to call Eleanor when I heard it. Footsteps. Not on the path. Not on the porch. underneath, in the crawl space I'd just left. Slow, deliberate footsteps moving across bare earth, from one end of the cabin to the other. I froze, the rain pouring down, my flashlight beam fixed on the access panel. The footsteps stopped. For a long moment, there was only the rain, only the endless, patient falling of water through darkness. Then, something moved in the access panel. Not coming out, just looking. A darkness within darkness. A shadow that somehow cast its own shadow, regarding me with attention that felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. "Daniel?" I whispered. The shadow shifted, not retreating, not advancing, just adjusting, as if my voice had surprised it. "If you're Daniel Carver," I said, louder now, "your parents are still looking for you. Eleanor Voss is still looking for you. People still want to know what happened." The rain fell harder. "If you're not Daniel," I continued, "if you're what he saw, what he drew, then I need to understand. What happened to him? What happens in cabin 7? For a moment, nothing. Then, from the darkness beneath the cabin, a voice. Young, uncertain, barely audible over the rain. "It won't let me leave." My hands were shaking. "Who won't?" "The camp," the voice said. "The rain. The thing that walks. It's been here so long. I think I'm part of it now. Part of the pattern. Like the rain. Like the water." "Daniel," I said firmly, "you're not. You're a person. You can leave. I can help you leave." A sound that might have been laughter, or might have been crying. "I tried," the voice said. "The first night I tried to run, down to the lake. But it was already too late. I'd seen it too clearly. I'd drawn it too many times. It was in my head, in my eyes, in every line I made. And once it's there, once you really see it, it doesn't forget." "What is it?" I asked. Silence, long enough that I thought the conversation was over. Then, "It's the space between things, between rain and earth, between day and night, between here and gone. The camp sits in that space, always has. And it needs anchors, witnesses, someone to see it, to mark its passing, to prove it exists." "You've been here for 22 years?" "Yes," the voice whispered. "And no, time is different underneath. Every night is the same night. Every rain is the first rain. I draw the same pictures, sleep in the same bag, listen to the same footsteps. Over and over. Forever." Thunder rumbled in the distance. The storm was building. "How do I help you?" I asked. "You can't," Daniel said. "But you can make sure no one else ends up here. Close the cabin. Lock it. Never let anyone stay in cabin 7 again. It's hungry. It's always hungry. And it's patient enough to wait another 22 years for the next person who sees too clearly." The shadow in the access panel shifted backward. retreating into the deeper darkness. "Wait," I called. "Please." But there was only rain now, only the sound of water on wood, on earth, on a man kneeling in the mud asking questions no one should have to ask. I stayed there until dawn started to gray the sky, watching the access panel, listening to the rain, trying to make sense of what I'd heard. As the first light touched the trees, I finally stood and walked back to the lodge, my clothes soaked through, my mind racing, carrying a truth I didn't know how to share. Eleanor was waiting on the porch, a blanket in her hands, her face drawn with worry and something that looked like recognition. "You went to cabin 7, she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "And?" I met her eyes. "It needs to be closed. Permanently. However you have to do it. Burn it. Tear it down. Fill it with concrete. Cabin 7 needs to stop existing." Eleanor studied my face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I know," she said quietly. "I've always known. I hoped I was wrong." The rain continued as we walked inside together. Two people carrying a secret too strange to speak and too true to ignore. We told the kids there had been a gas leak. It was David's idea. Practical, believable. The kind of danger that made sense to modern minds. By noon, we had everyone packed and loaded into the vans. The rain had softened to a drizzle, but it still fell, patient and persistent, as we drove away from Hollow Pines. I watched cabin 7 disappear in the rearview mirror, sitting alone in its clearing, windows dark, secrets held. Eleanor stayed behind. She said she had paperwork to file, equipment to secure, 100 administrative details to manage. But I knew the real reason. She needed to decide what came next. How to close a door that shouldn't have been opened. How to end a story that had been repeating for longer than either of us could guess. A week later, she called me. "I've contacted Daniel's parents," she said without preamble. "Told them we found his backpack and journals. Told them most of the truth. That he was frightened of something at the camp. That he documented what he saw. That we may never know exactly what happened, but we know he was trying to make sense of something difficult." How did they respond? "They're grateful," Eleanor said, and I could hear the emotion in her voice. "After 22 years of nothing, even this small amount of knowing is something. Margaret wants to come see the camp. Henry wants to burn every building to the ground. But they're grateful." Through my phone, I could hear rain, still falling at Hollow Pines. "What are you going to do with the cabin?" I asked. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "The county has agreed to let me close the camp permanently. The insurance costs, the liability, the location. There are enough official reasons. Cabin 7 will be dismantled, board by board. Every drawing beneath it documented and destroyed. The foundation will be filled in. By the end of the month, there will be nothing there but earth and trees. Will that be enough?" "I don't know," she admitted. "But it's what I can do. What I should have done 22 years ago." I thought about Daniel Carver, still walking beneath the cabin that was being dismantled around him, still drawing pictures that would be destroyed, still waiting for a morning that would never come. I wanted to believe that closing the physical space would free him, that destroying the cabin would break whatever pattern held him. But I suspected the truth was more complicated, that what haunted Hollow Pines wasn't tied to wood and nails and foundation stones. It was tied to the space itself, the in-between place where rain never quite stopped falling, where shadows moved differently, where time could fold back on itself and trap someone in an endless repetition of their own fear. "Eleanor," I said carefully. In Daniel's journals, he wrote that the thing he saw had been there as long as the camp has, maybe longer. How old is Hollow Pines? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. The official camp was built in 1947, but there are records of buildings here going back to the 1880s. Logging camps, hunting lodges. Before that, just forest, just rain. And how long have people been disappearing? Silence on the line. Just the sound of rain in the background, falling at Hollow Pines, falling and falling and falling. "I don't know," Eleanor finally said. "I never looked that far back. I didn't want to know." We said our goodbyes, and I hung up thinking about all the things we choose not to know, all the questions we decline to ask because we suspect the answers will change us in ways we can't undo. 3 months later, Eleanor sent me a letter. Not an email, not a text, but an actual letter, written by hand on good paper, the envelope bearing a smudged postmark from a town near Hollow Pines. Inside, she'd written, "The cabin is gone. We took it down piece by piece, and we burned every board. The drawings underneath were photographed for Daniel's parents, then destroyed. The foundation was filled with concrete. I planted grass seed. By spring, you won't be able to tell anything was ever there. But Morgan, the rain hasn't stopped. It's been falling every day since we began the dismantling, and it's still falling now. The local weather service says it's unprecedented. 3 months of continuous precipitation. The lake is higher than it's ever been. The forest is so saturated that trees are starting to fall. Last night, I went to where Cabin 7 stood. Just grass now, just empty ground. But I swear I could hear footsteps underneath. Slow, steady, searching. I don't think we freed him. I think we just removed the only landmark he had. Now he's lost in the space between, walking in the rain, trying to find his way back to a cabin that doesn't exist anymore. I'm closing the property. The county will take it over. Let it return to forest. Maybe that's what it should have been all along. Maybe some places aren't meant for human habitation. Maybe some spaces exist only for the things that live between. I'm sorry I brought your group there. I thought I could make it normal again. But some places can't be normal. They can only be what they are. Take care of yourself. And if you're ever driving through this part of the state, and the rain starts to fall just as you approach a certain stretch of forest, keep driving. Don't stop. Don't look for hollow pines. It's not a place anyone should visit. Not anymore. Eleanor. I keep that letter in my desk drawer. Sometimes, on rainy nights, I take it out and read it again, thinking about Daniel Carver walking through an endless rain, drawing pictures in the space between what is and what was. Forever 14, forever lost, forever trying to document something that refuses to be documented. I think about Eleanor Voss, carrying 22 years of guilt and 1 week of terrible knowledge. I think about hollow pines, returning to forest, the buildings dismantled, the paths overgrown, the rain falling and falling and falling. And I think about all the camps, all the old places, all the spaces between that we build on and name and pretend to understand, never quite seeing what looks back at us from the shadows, what walks beneath our floorboards, what waits in the rain for someone to see it clearly enough to become part of its pattern. The rain at Hollow Pines falls still. It will fall forever. And somewhere beneath the grass where Cabin 7 once stood, a boy who loved to draw is still trying to make sense of shadows, still documenting the undocumentable, still waiting for a morning that will never come. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. Some are only meant to be marked, documented, and passed along as warnings to those who might otherwise stumble into the same patterns, the same spaces, the same endless rain. This is that warning. If you find yourself at a camp called Hollow Pines, where the rain never quite stops falling, if you're assigned to Cabin 7, or a cabin that sits just slightly apart from the others, if you see shadows that move wrong, or hear footsteps underneath the floorboards, leave. Don't document it. Don't try to understand it. Don't draw pictures or write journals or attempt to make rational sense of something that exists beyond rationality. Just leave. Some things in this world are patient enough to wait forever for someone who sees them clearly enough to take their place in the pattern. Don't let that someone be you. Thank you for joining me tonight at Hollow Pines. I hope you found what you were looking for. A mystery, a story, a quiet hour of rain and shadows and questions that don't quite have answers. If you're still awake, let the sound of the rain carry you gently towards sleep. If you've drifted off already, may your dreams be peaceful, unburdened by walking shadows and spaces between. Tomorrow, the sun will rise. The rain will stop. The normal world will return. But on nights like this, when the rain falls steady and patient against your window, remember, some places exist just outside the borders of normal. Some patterns repeat forever. And some mysteries are better left in the dark, unexamined, undocumented, unknown. Sleep well, listeners. And if you hear footsteps underneath your floorboards tonight, well, it's probably just the rain. Probably.